October 23, 1940. On the French-Spanish border, two dictators meet inside a train car. Adolf Hitler, fresh from victories in Western Europe, expects Franco to join the Axis war machine. Spain had received help from Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy during its civil war. In Hitler's mind, the debt was obvious. Franco owed him, but Franco had a different plan. Instead of giving Hitler the alliance he wanted, he handed him a list of demands so huge, so inconvenient, and so politically dangerous that Germany could barely pretend to accept it. By the end of the meeting, Hitler would leave furious, Operation Felix would stall, and Spain would remain outside the Second World War. This is the story of how a ruined country, led by a cynical dictator, made itself too expensive for Hitler to buy. To understand Franco's gamble, rewind to 1939. While Europe slid toward another world war, Spain was crawling out of its own catastrophe, the Spanish Civil War. For 3 years, the country had torn itself apart. Cities were bombed. Infrastructure was wrecked. The economy was broken. Food shortages were severe. Families, towns, and regions were left bitterly divided. Franco had won, but he inherited a country on its knees. His regime was authoritarian, nationalist, and fiercely anti-communist, which made him ideologically close to Hitler and Mussolini, and he had not won alone. Germany's Condor Legion had supported his forces from the air, while Fascist Italy sent men, weapons, and money. So, when World War II began, Hitler assumed Spain would eventually repay the favor. Then came the summer of 1940. Germany smashed through Western Europe. France collapsed. Britain stood alone. Suddenly, Spain's geography became extremely important. Hitler wanted Gibraltar. That tiny British-held fortress at the entrance to the Mediterranean was a strategic prize. If the Axis seized it, Britain's access to the Mediterranean would be threatened, the Royal Navy squeezed, and Axis influence in North Africa strengthened. The German plan was Operation Felix: move troops through Spain, attack Gibraltar, and slam the Mediterranean gate shut. But German troops could not reach Gibraltar without Franco's permission. Pressure built fast. Berlin expected cooperation. Franco's pro-Axis foreign minister, Ramon Serrano Suñé, pushed Spain closer to Germany. The Axis seemed unstoppable, and betting on Hitler looked tempting to many in Franco's circle, but Franco saw the trap. Spain was not a fresh power waiting to conquer. It was exhausted. Its army was worn down. Its economy needed food, fuel, and imports just to function. If Spain entered the war, Britain could blockade Spanish ports almost immediately. The result would not be glory. It could be hunger, collapse, and the end of Franco's regime. So Franco did what dictators often do when they cannot say yes and cannot safely say no. He stalled. He never slammed the door in Hitler's face. Instead, he raised the price. Spain would consider joining the war, but only if Germany provided what Spain needed to survive: grain, fuel, military equipment, and protection against British retaliation. Franco was turning weakness into leverage. If Hitler wanted Spain, Hitler would have to pay for Spain. And then came Hendaye. On October 23, 1940, Hitler's train arrived at the French border town of Hendaye. Franco's train was late. Maybe it was logistics. Maybe it was theater. Either way, it set the mood perfectly. Hitler, who expected obedience, was kept waiting by a dictator ruling a starving, damaged country. Inside the train car, the meeting dragged on for more than 7 hours. Hitler explained the strategic logic. Spain joins the war, German troops cross Spanish territory, Gibraltar falls, and the Axis gains a major advantage. Franco responded with the bill. First, he wanted huge material support. Spain needed grain to feed its people, fuel for its economy, and modern weapons to defend itself if Britain struck back. Germany was already fighting a major war and preparing for larger campaigns. Supplying Spain at that level would be a massive burden. Then Franco raised the real problem: territory. He did not just want Gibraltar, he wanted a Spanish empire in North Africa, including French Morocco and parts of French Algeria. But those territories belonged to Vichy France, the collaborationist government Hitler had just created after defeating France. Franco was asking Hitler to betray one ally to gain another that was poorer, weaker, and dangerously exposed. It was a brilliant kind of impossible. Franco never truly refused Hitler. He simply repeated that Spain could not enter the war unless its conditions were met. The demands were so high they functioned like a locked door. But Franco never had to say no. Hitler was used to threats, speed, and intimidation. Franco gave him delay, ambiguity, and paperwork. The meeting ended with only a vague, secret understanding that Spain might enter the war later, at the time of Franco's choosing, after its demands were satisfied. Conveniently, they never were. Hitler left Hendaye empty-handed and furious. He later complained to Mussolini that he would rather have several teeth pulled than go through another meeting with Franco. Operation Felix was postponed, then abandoned. Franco had made Spain look less like a valuable ally and more like an expensive liability. But Franco could not simply break with the Axis. Germany was still powerful and Spain was vulnerable, so he kept both sides guessing. Spain adopted the status of non-belligerent. It was not quite neutral because Franco's sympathies clearly leaned toward the Axis, but it was also not at war. His biggest concession was the Blue Division. When Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941, Franco allowed Spanish volunteers to fight alongside the Germans on the Eastern Front. More than 45,000 Spaniards would eventually serve. This let Franco support Hitler's anti-communist crusade without declaring war on Britain or the United States. That distinction mattered. The Blue Division was a symbolic payment to Germany, but carefully limited. Spanish volunteers fought the Soviets, not the Western Allies. Franco could claim ideological loyalty while avoiding full entry into the war. The Allies understood Spain's weakness too. Britain and later the United States used economic pressure as their main weapon. Spain needed imported oil, food, and raw materials. The Allies could restrict those supplies, delay them, or cut them off. Their message was simple: stay out of the war, and Spain can keep breathing. Join Hitler, and the lifeline ends. This was the other side of Franco's strategy. He was not only bargaining with Hitler, he was negotiating with the Allies under the shadow of blockade and famine. If Spain entered the war, the Royal Navy could strangle Spanish trade. Spanish islands and overseas territories would be exposed. Franco knew his country could not withstand that pressure, so his outrageous demands at Hendaye were not just a trick. They reflected reality. Spain really did need enormous support to survive a major war. Franco's genius, if you want to call it that, was making that weakness impossible for Hitler to ignore. Then the tide turned. In 1942, the Allies landed in North Africa. At Stalingrad, Germany suffered disaster. The image of an unstoppable Axis cracked. Franco adjusted quickly. The pro-Axis tone in Spanish politics and media cooled. Spain moved gradually away from non-belligerence and back toward stricter neutrality. In 1943, under Allied pressure, Franco ordered the Blue Division home. By 1945, Hitler was dead. Mussolini was dead. The Axis was destroyed. Franco somehow remained. Spain had avoided the full devastation of World War II, but Franco's regime was not redeemed. After the war, Spain was isolated for its fascist ties and authoritarian rule. Yet as the Cold War hardened, Franco reinvented himself as an anti-communist barrier in Western Europe. The same ideology that had tied him to Hitler helped him gain grudging acceptance from the West. He remained dictator of Spain until his death in 1975. So why did Spain really skip World War II? Not because Franco was moral, not because Spain was secretly committed to peace. Spain stayed out because it was broken, hungry, and militarily exposed. Franco knew entering the war could destroy his country and his regime, so he turned weakness into a weapon. He asked Hitler for food, fuel, weapons, protection, and an empire in North Africa. He demanded more than Germany could afford and more than Hitler could politically give. Hendaye was the climax. A dictator with a terrible hand somehow convincing a stronger dictator that the pot was not worth the price. In the end, Spain skipped World War II because Franco made joining the Axis too costly, the Allies made neutrality more survivable, and Spain's civil war wounds left the country with almost nothing to give. It was not heroism, it was survival, wrapped in cynicism, delay, and diplomatic nerve. What do you think? Was Franco a brilliant strategist who saved Spain from disaster, or a lucky opportunist with no real choice? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this look at the hidden diplomacy of World War II, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next History Rewind.